sort of chief instructor for this evening's webinar. Basically, I'm the AT coordinator for New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, coordinating the 3 Appalachian Trail committees. Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Haggett. I'm with the, can you hear me? I hope.
Yep.
Okay, I'm co-chair of the Duchess Appalachian Trail Management Committee, focusing on the corridor monitoring of things, while Donna Chapman, the other principal chair, deals with trail maintenance and other issues dealing with the Trail Conference and Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Fred?
I'm Fred Stern. I'm the AT corridor supervisor for Putnam County, New York, and I also, along with my wife, am a corridor monitor in Dutchess County for one section.
And I guess, Melissa, you should introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Melissa Cassini. I am the New Jersey Program Coordinator for the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. And I'm just here tonight to moderate and make sure that everything goes smoothly.
The rest of you, you should be muted right now, or mute yourself if you haven't already. We're getting some echo.
Okay. Unmuted or muted?
Muted.
Yeah, please be unmuted for the moment. We'll get, okay. Let's see, how many of us are on right now? 21. Well, I think it's enough to go ahead and get started. So we will get the show on the road here. Welcome to the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference webinar on corridor monitoring. Just so people know, since I've reviewed some of the questionnaires people turned back in, the reality is that this is not the same thing as trail maintenance or trail building. So if that's your expectations, we're going to be on a different plane tonight. We're going to be talking about following particular land boundaries. And generally, although we're doing it on behalf of the Appalachian Trail, all our examples are from there, this same concept can be applied for other boundary work. Couple of things on general participation in tonight's webinar. Most of you who are on devices larger than a phone will notice that if you scroll towards the bottom, you should get a toolbar like the one showing now. If you click on the participants thing, that allows you to do, amongst other things, raise your hand if you have something you'd like to comment on. We will have particular times for question and answer, but just to make it clear, that's one opportunity. And you'll notice next to that is a button marked chat, and then that brings up a Zoom group chat where you can, where the arrow ends right below the word everyone, you can type in something that will appear in the chat window. Melissa will be monitoring the chat window, so if you have questions, one of the ways you can ask it is through the chat window. Okay, having said that, we'd also like you to use the chat box right away, because many of you have your name shows up on our list of people attending only with a phone number or something. So we'd appreciate if you'd open the chat box and just put your name in there so we know who's actually with us tonight on the show. That'll be helpful to the Trail Conference office. So you'll get, yeah, I see people doing that as we speak. So thanks for your help on that. Okay, let's get a little bit into the next thing. Here's the program for the next couple of hours. The introduction is, we're sort of underway on that, more to come. Then we'll be talking about the AT, Appalachian Trail, for those who might not know that abbreviation, corridor. We'll talk about some of the different jobs, the 3 M's from volunteers, boundary monitoring, boundary maintenance, and encroachment mitigation. The bold letters are the M's we're talking about. And in boundary monitoring, that's where most of the new information will come from, skills type things. We're dealing with maps, monuments, boundary line surveying, and then putting that all together. And then finally, after the three M's, we'll be talking about reporting and next steps. Part of what you're looking at tonight is probably deciding if this program is for you. So we'll discuss that again right at the end. Okay, the link, almost, I assume everybody who's on the call got a link that included the link to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's AT Corridor Stewardship Field Book. The front cover looks like the left side of the screen, and its index or table of contents is on the right. A number of the slides we'll be using tonight are taken directly from that, and others are taken from local experience as well. We recommended that you, if possible, print this off in advance so you can refer to your own copy. It's also downloadable from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I'm sure most of you have done that. If anybody here has not had a chance to do it, we definitely recommend at the end of this webinar that you do download and read it, because it fills in a lot of the details. We had sort of asked you to do a bit of homework of read, I think, pages 5 to 11 up front, which gives you a certain amount of introductory material that we're not going to cover in detail tonight. Okay, so let's talk about what monitoring is like. What you see on the introduction screen here is some people at a monitoring class that we have run in the past. A little bit about the organization, since some of you may not be directly involved with New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, so we're going to mention briefly a little bit about it. And since it's the sponsoring organization for this webinar and other similar outdoor webinars, the Trail Conference is almost 100 years old. It's largely a volunteer organization with a board of directors and a lot of volunteer work. Over 2,500 or so miles of trail that are volunteer maintained. We build trails, we protect them, and we maintain them. So let's go on to the next one. The headquarters building of the Trail Conference is on the left in this slide, 600 Ramapo Valley Road in Mahwah, New Jersey. And the map on the right shows the territory, most of the territory, there's a little more that doesn't show on here, that the Trail Conference actually gets involved in for handling its trail programs. Melissa, our host tonight, is actually the conference manager or coordinator for New Jersey. So, and she's fairly new to the Trail Conference, so we're all welcoming her. But you can see the different regions that the Trail Conference has, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment here. The job we're discussing tonight is the job of the corridor monitor. We're going to use it as an Appalachian Trail position, although, as I mentioned before, it could be other organizations that have trail lands. So here you see the kind of work that a monitor does. There is some patrolling, where most of it is boundary type patrolling, reporting, protecting, and educating neighbors of the trail. This gives you an overview of how the volunteer side of the Trail Conference is organized, except for the bar across the top. The program coordinator is a staff position at the Trail Conference. And then underneath that are a number of local trail committees. For the Appalachian Trail, there are 3 of them. We'll mention that in a moment. And within each of those trail committees, there's either a corridor manager or a supervisor. Different areas have different names. And as a corridor monitor, you'd be operating under that supervisor. So that's sort of the bottom center position, is the corridor monitor. So you will have, I said, either a manager, a quarter manager, or a supervisor, and they'll assign you a piece of it if you decide this is a volunteer position that interests you. They'll teach basic skills beyond what we're doing tonight. They'll monitor your performance, and they'll respond to any problems or requests. And notice at the bottom, if you start and have a problem, let us know so we can replace you. One thing I will mention is that I know about a third of the people attending tonight are from New Jersey. There's not a whole lot of Appalachian Trail quarter lands in New Jersey, but there are some lands across the line in Orange and Rockland counties of New York and a little bit in New Jersey. So you may have to travel a bit if you decide to take one of these positions. So right now, if you have any thoughts, you can use the chat box. So I'm going to use this. Just one other thing we're going to say is that when you're out in the field, whether you're on trail or off, these are some of the hazards that you might be worried about or concerned about. Poison ivy, left and center, snakes, stinging insects, those are just about everywhere, but deer ticks are a specific major problem for quarter monitoring, largely because quarter monitoring involves hiking off trail. You're not going to be, for a large part of the work, on any established trail. So you need to be very careful about protection from ticks. So having said that, I'll take a short break here. Okay. Somebody's already asked the question, how long is each assigned segment? We'll get into that a little bit more later. So instead of rushing into that right now, but that's something we will answer further on in the program. Any other questions? Melissa, anything come in to you?
No hands raised, Ron.
No yet. Okay. If there are no questions, we'll get on to the program. First thing we'll talk about is what the Appalachian Trail Corridor actually is. Many of you have probably hiked on the Appalachian Trail. I mean, it's about 4 feet wide, if it's, but it is separate from the trail land. Before 1980, the trail in New York was largely a road walk. The reason being that the original Appalachian Trail, it was finished in 1937, went through a lot of privately held lands. Some of them changed hands over time. The new owner decided they didn't want anybody walking on their property. And what that generally meant is that from a road crossing to the next road crossing, the trail moved onto a road walk, often unpaved, sometimes even paved. So for example, by 1965 in Dutchess County, New York, where many of our volunteers work on the trail, the 30 miles of the trail, 26 of those miles were road walking, which all led to a major pressure that ended in 1978. Well, 68 started part one, which was the passage of the National Trail System Act, which made the Appalachian Trail a national trail. But more importantly, 1978, there were amendments to the Trail System Act, which resulted in funding for the National Park Service to acquire lands on behalf of the trail. Those protected lands that the National Park Service bought constitute the Appalachian Trail Corridor. There are some lands protected by others. So for example, the two states that in New York and New Jersey, some of them go through DEC lands in New York State or park lands in both states. But the corridor itself, the part the Park Service purchased, per mile of the Appalachian Trail, they generally acquired an average of 128 acres, which works out to, if you do the math, about an average corridor of about 1,000 feet wide. So that's the Appalachian Trail Corridor. So, as you might have guessed, the Park Service, to assemble that corridor, had to buy properties from a number of different landowners. They hired realty agents who went out in the field once a potential route for the trail was determined, and they started acquiring lands or interest in lands, creating the corridor, and they map the resulting corridor. We'll talk more about that. And then to protect that corridor, the Park Service spent a fair amount of money contracting with surveyors licensed in the state, generally New York for the case we're talking about here, to mark those boundary lines, identify the boundaries, corners, and map the results. So some of what we're going to be talking about a little later tonight are the various maps that are generated in these two procedures. The other reason we're here is that the National Park Service, even though it owns the corridor, delegated the oversight of those lands to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. We'll use that ATC abbreviation for ATC. They in turn, in our case, delegated the job to the local trail clubs. There are 31 trail-wide. In our region, New York, New Jersey Trail Conference is that trail club. So if you hear the word club, think Trail Conference. It's the same thing for us. The corridor monitoring program with volunteers was created in the mid-1980s. By the time the Park Service had begun to establish and acquire significant amounts of land in connected pieces. Okay, so let's talk about it. In New York and New Jersey, the land is managed by 3 Appalachian Trail Management Committees. Dutchess Putnam, New York is the east of the Hudson River. Orange Rockland, New York is New York west of the Hudson, and New Jersey. Between the 3 of them, the AT covers about 160 miles in the 2 states. And for an example, in the New York on the east side of the river alone has over 5,000 acres of land that have been acquired. And again, New Jersey doesn't have a lot of National Park Service corridor because most of it's on state lands. And some of the, I don't know if any of the state lands actually have volunteers doing corridor management. Probably not, but there are some AT National Park Service properties in Jersey, and those do need volunteer corridor monitors. Okay, that was another chunk of stuff. We're going to give an opportunity to raise your hand or ask questions at a number of spots tonight. So here's the next one. Anything about that information about what the corridor is? Any questions? Any uncertainty?
Lawrence has a question. Can there be too many corridor monitors for the trail?
Good question. We're actually in many areas now going to be doing some doubling up. As you'll see in one of the later slides, corridor monitoring can be a very lonely thing. You're nowhere near a trail. You may be out in the middle of nowhere. So we're recommending that we partner different corridor monitors together. We have a number of particular slots, and one of the things we may do in some cases, if we have enough volunteers, is to break up some of the larger pieces and give them to multiple, then divide them into multiple sections. More about that later. Any other questions?
Rose says, so there are no corridor monitors on state lands. Is that correct?
If anybody wants to disagree with me on that, there's no regular corridor monitoring on, for example, state parks. It's a little tricky, I say it with a little reservation, because there are some areas where the corridor actually goes in and out of state land. Somebody's got their sound on, please mute it if you just came on, thank you. Fred or Jim, any other comments on that question?
Yeah, I was going to just say that there's an exception to every rule. There is a corridor in Hudson Highland State Park, which is state land, and so that's an exception.
Okay.
We also have a question from Adrian. Is there a list somewhere that we can look at to determine if there's any area we can monitor responsibly, not sign up, and find out it's too far away?
Jim? Unmute.
There are, several openings where we don't have anybody. And as Ron mentioned, we have other areas that have one person, and it would be wise to have another person join that person, so there's a pair of people going out together. That's wise from a safety point of view. I can provide a list of all the sections that we have. I don't know, where can we post that, Ron, or Melissa?
Actually, what
Sorry,
I
go
was
ahead,
going
Ron.
to, yeah, what I was going to suggest is at the end of this, if people are actually interested in proceeding, even before you get close to an assignment, we're going to ask you to get in touch with the Trail Conference with a volunteer at nynjtc.org and state your interest, and we can provide you that kind of information. We're obviously not going to get out and do field work anytime real soon, thanks to the virus situation, but we are going to be developing some potential areas for you, and Jim will put stuff together. We'll probably, through the volunteer office, the Trail Conference, be able to get that out to you.
I would also say that if people express an interest in this particular form of volunteering, that they let us know and tell us where they live, and we can try to match them up with a location that's closest to their home.
Any other questions on this so far? Okay, we'll jump into some of the real technical items now. The 3 M's, we saw them briefly before. The monitoring, the boundary monitoring is locating the boundary that's been surveyed, observing and recording its condition. A little more to it than that, but that's the general idea. Boundary maintenance is another thing that most of the monitors pick up. Almost all of them do. And that's actually doing some of the repainting of the boundary markings. It's like trailblazing, but has its own special issues, and installing particular signage that is needed on the boundary. And finally, encroachment mitigation, which means when we have problems where people do things they shouldn't be, is to A, prevent it when possible, but B, also try to reduce the damage that it causes. So let's hop into each of these. Boundary monitoring itself. I mentioned it earlier that there's a number of different charts and maps that are generated that sort of give you your job. The first one we're going to talk about is called a segment map. They're created originally by the National Park Service, and they show in a particular area the tracks that were acquired. We'll show you an example momentarily. There are over 100 segments that the Park Service identified, most of them from Virginia up to Maine. Let's get an idea. Many of the spots elsewhere in the South, or even in parts of New Hampshire and Vermont, are in national forests, which are treated differently. The surveyors that did the survey work for the Park Service created survey maps, and the survey maps show the result of their field work of what they actually put in. We'll get into a lot of the detail of that in a little bit here. And part of that is monument reference drawing, which is another thing created by the surveyors. And probably in the next few minutes, you'll understand what that's all about as well. Here's an example of a segment map. And if you have good enough monitor to see the detail, this is segment 273. This one happens to be on the, if I'm reading it correctly, the Dutchess Putnam line. Yeah, it is. So this is an actual local one in New York east of the Hudson. And each of those pieces that have little bubbles inside them are individual tracks that were acquired by a Park Service Realty office person for the Appalachian Trail. Over in the upper right corner is a register which lists all those tracks that were acquired for the trail. well, if you actually end up doing monitoring, you'll have an appropriate segment map, or more than one sometimes, depending on the location, and survey maps. And by the way, over time, some of this information is now showing up in forms that are machine readable. So we're slowly but surely moving into the 21st century, where you don't carry these maps are normally 24 by 36 inches, but some of them have been digitized and are available that way. So that's sort of where things are headed. But right now, this is what a segment map looks like. Gives you an idea of how much land they cover. Normally on these maps, 1 inch is 600 feet on the ground. So you can see, if that's true, a 1,000-foot wide corridor would be just under 2 inches of size. And you can see how it tends to be in that range. Of course, you'd have to get a sense that this is a 24 by 36 map, but you begin to see that some areas are a little narrower, especially near some of the road crossings, like at the very top left on the map. Some of the stuff, it's in a different color. Most of the stuff you see on the right side that's in sort of a tan is part of Fonsstock State Park, which actually comes all the way up to the Dutchess Putnam line. And the trail is largely on that piece. So that is a segment map that's, again, generated by the National Park Service and shows the acquired tracts. That's then turned over, once an area has been acquired, to a surveyor, a surveying company. There have been maybe half a dozen survey companies that have been employed since about 1984, up through as recently as a few years ago. And they create survey maps. Now you'll notice a couple of things different. First of all, survey maps, and this one is essentially that same area, or part of it, are at a larger scale. So 1 inch on these maps is, depending on where you are, is it's 200 or 200 feet or 300 feet. This one is, I think, Fred or Jim, you can confirm for me.
Yeah, I think it's 200.
200 feet. So this is a larger scale. So for one segment, there's often 2 or more survey maps. It is not topographical, so you don't see the topo lines that you did on the segment map. The segment map is based on the local topographical mapping system that's used in the area, but does not show all of the internal property lines that individual property owners might have contributed, but does show the boundaries of the trail. And you can see in most cases, the dark black line is the boundary of the Appalachian Trail lands. So actually, I can give you an idea. I'll use, since most of you see the moving around here, you can see there's boundary going over this way from the top center. So that's an example of what the boundary itself looks like on a survey map. You'll notice there's lots of notes. There's other information on the map, which we'll talk about later. Okay, any other questions now that we're getting into some of the detailed specifics? Any questions on the mapping?
Okay, yeah. Oh, frick.
Rose, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do, and I can't. Where's the raise your hand? I don't see that.
So I have you unmuted already, so you can go ahead. But just
Okay.
so everybody knows too, if you click participants down at the bottom of your screen.
Oh, that's where. Okay,
Yes.
got it. Okay. Can you go back to that survey map? And you showed where the boundaries were on the corridor. Where's the trail?
It doesn't always show on a survey map. Sometimes newer survey maps may show the trail, but it is not part of their contract that they had to map the trail.
Okay, what happens on the map before it, the segment map? you had,
Wait a minute.
No.
I went too far back.
yeah,
Hold on, sorry.
that's okay. On the segment map, on the upper right-hand corner, you had a little green squiggly line. And I'm assuming that that was the trail. And I was just kind of curious how that fits in on the map. Okay, so in the upper right-hand corner, there's that white box with the green lines in it. Is that the trail? What is that?
Let's see.
This is
Yep.
Jim speaking. That little box is sort of an anomaly. You will not see that on normal segment maps. I chose this one for the course because it's in color.
Okay,
The normal segment maps are just black and white.
okie doke.
So that square where you're seeing the green line, that
That's just in whatever.
I think that's showing where this segment is and the overall length of the AT.
Ah.
Okay.
So
Now,
just ignore that, really.
now again, is this another map where you can't see the trail?
That's
Is
correct.
the trail in here? Okay.
You'll notice we're getting a chat comment from Ryan Seltzer. That's sort of the placement map that shows you where this map is.
That's right. Just, yeah, and I got
Yeah.
that from Jim too. But so the green
I can go back, yeah.
on that map, in the segment map, is the trail somewhere in there?
Has to be.
Okay, that was,
That's the land that was acquired, and the trail has to fit in that space.
got it. Okay, I'm just, yeah, okay, I got you. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay.
F. Robson has their hand raised. So I'm
Can
gonna.
you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was going to say to Rose, one of the first things I did when I started working on my segment was to draw the trail in all of the segment maps. So,
Okay.
I got out my other map and drew because it's just helpful, because if you want to access parts of your corridor, you can go along the trail for a while and then pop into the corridor. So
Got it.
hopefully, someday they'll put the actual trails in there, but
Actually,
you have
one
to
of-
draw them yourself.
One of the
Okay.
reasons they don't is we move the trail. We don't move the boundaries that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, we have a question from Gennaro. I'm gonna unmute you.
Hi there. So within the acquired land on the segment maps, is that land available for hikers to explore, and is it open to the public, I guess is my question, and is that something that needs to be monitored by volunteers? Or are we strictly looking at just the corridor?
Can I speak to that? This is Jim's. The land is really open to the public. There's nothing to stop one from going off trail. We do get concerned when there are so many people that do it that it creates what we call a rogue trail.
Sure.
It confuses actual AT hikers. So yeah, you can go into that land. We always worry about leave no trace. We don't want people picking or foraging for edible plants in there, or possibly trampling on rare plants. So there's a danger when people go off trail that they may do damage and be unaware of it.
One other comment is generally the corridor is not open for camping or anything like that, because in these two states, the camping is at the identified overnight use sites, especially in New York. So you should not be camping on that land. And we generally discourage other use of the corridor because a lot of it could turn into to problem areas. It is public land.
All right.
I mean, as people point out, the Appalachian Trail, National Scenic Trail, is a national park.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and certainly we are, when we monitor, we'll see later, we spend most of the time on the boundary, but we're looking for problems on the entire 1,000-foot wide or whatever it actually is corridor. It could be anywhere between the corridor, the edge, the trail, and the other edge.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's go ahead so we stay on schedule. We'll talk about what the surveyors actually did when they were out in the field. You know, if you saw that either of the segment or survey maps, you'll notice that the properties have corners. The corner does not mean a sharp right angle. It's any change in the direction of the boundary. And at each time there is a change like that, their job was to set a monument. On the left, at the bottom here, you see what's called a rock tablet. It's one of two general forms of a monument. That's what happens when with their surveying equipment, they determine where the exact corner of the property is. And if it sits on a piece of bedrock, they drill a hole in the rock, they get one of these rock tablets out, and they epoxy it in. So that's what's called a rock tablet. If the corner shows up just in the middle of nowhere, you know, like out in, between, just an open terrain, they use what's called a standard monument. And the one on the right, which is an actual one, 271 New York 89B, we'll talk about that. Oops, my error again. I keep doing this. If I hit the wrong key here, I send us back to the beginning. Give me just a second here. We'll see if we get back to where we're supposed to be. Okay. But what you see down at the bottom of that picture is an actual standard monument. It's on a post. That post flares at the bottom to make it hard to steal, frankly. And those posts are about 3.5, 4 feet long, so it's not trivial when they put them in. There are other special cases. If you've printed off or can get to a copy of the manual, the Stewardship Field Book, pages 18 and 9 gives some more examples. So let's go on to some of these. These monuments, when the surveyor puts them in, are labeled. They start with a blank one, and they put in information as they work their way around the boundary. First one is which segment this boundary is part of, and you'll see the 268 on this one. Then the state, New York, and then they sequentially number them normally, but there's special cases too. But so monument 1, then monument 2, 3, and they normally go around clockwise, marking the boundary. Then, if there's a long straight line, for example, as sometimes happens that we might get a half a mile long section of a straight line, just to make it less likely that people will wander off or where people know where the boundary is, if it's a long straight line. Generally, if it's over 500 feet, well, at least every 500 feet, sometimes closer, they'll put intermediate monuments. So they might, if you have a long line from New York 31 to New York 32 on segment 271, they'll be labeled with 31A or 31B. And you'll notice on this particular monument, you'll notice right there, 13B. So that's an example of one of those intermediate monuments. Okay. And there's some other cases that occur too. Sometimes after the survey work is done, the Park Service acquires additional lands in an area, in which case once they have enough in an area, they'll contract for another survey. So you might see a letter after the segment number at 271A, and that A is bolded just to make it clear on the screen here, that indicates that an additional survey was done of new lands. What that often does, if you get some significant pieces, is takes part of what used to be boundary and creates it as internal boundary lines. They're no longer maintained, but they're not taken out either. We put them in because they are useful documents. These maps are also filed with county offices. So we want to keep that as available information. And another special case is an offset monument. A good example might be if a corner is in the middle of a stream, they might set the monument on the off the stream, maybe 10 feet on one or the other of the lines coming into that there and indicate which way it's offset. Some other special cases. Sometimes we share a boundary with a New York State highway is a good example, in which case they often use concrete monuments. Along roads, sometimes we use just iron pipes or pens. Sometimes there's others like that that are set by other surveyors. Along roads, we also encounter when the road takes a smooth turn, or relatively so, the boundary line may actually be an arc of a circle. And those often we do not set, we don't put boundary monuments all the way along the arc of a circle. We put them at the ends, and the documentation talks about it being a section of a circle. Page 18 in the manual gives you more examples, but here's one of them. Here's what concrete monuments look like in the field. Okay, monuments, any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay, give you 5 more seconds and we'll move ahead on. Okay, now.
Sorry, Ron, we did just get a question from Lawrence. Do they
Okay.
all have magnets?
That's a good point. Those monuments do have buried inside the head of them a small bar magnet that's sort of permanently attached underneath to help locate them sometimes. And in fact, that's one of the things we're going to be talking about now is this next section is the whole question of how we locate monuments. We have jokingly say if a tree falls near the boundary, it lands on a monument. So one of the things that the surveyors are asked to do is to identify some generally substantial nearby trees where we call them monument references, or sometimes you'll hear us use witness trees. It's really the same thing. In this case, they happen to be at exactly 120-degree angles. That rarely happens in practice. But this shows you of what a monument reference would look like, the monument being in the center there, and then the distance and direction to each of the trees that relate to it. And those trees are specially marked as well. We'll see that in a couple of minutes as well. And you talk about the whole pile of these monument references. They are put together on a sheet that the surveyor prepares. And this is one from some of the early survey work done in Dutchess and Putnam counties. So right underneath each of those circles is a number for which monument it refers to. And then it has the different trees and the angles at which they are located. And in the lower right corner is a key to what kinds of trees they say. So it might say 12-inch O might be a 12-inch oak. So this is another version. This is right out of the stewardship manual. I show this one just because it's a slightly different version of the monument reference sheet done by a different surveyor. Over time, these have gotten a little bit more readable. You'll notice here that there are 4 of them that don't have trees referenced. That might be something as an example of the boundary is going through an open farm field, and therefore there's nothing close enough to bother using as a treed reference. So there may say no reference available on those monuments. Now, usually they're done on trees. There are exceptions, but they're called witness trees, as the examples we've seen have shown, and normally 3 marked per monument. Newer ones, since done in the last 20 years or so, each tree has 3 horizontal axed blazed yellow painted marks. Older ones may have single blazes. They'll set a nail into the tree about knee height, sticks out part way, And in that distance you saw in the monument references, the distance from that nail to the center of the monument. So here's some example of old and new format witness trees. The one on the left, and what's being painted there is the location of the actual nail. And on the right, you see one of the newer ones that shows with 3 horizontal marks. They were X-blazed and then painted. Generally, these nails and the witnesses point towards the direction of the monument itself. So if you can generally find 2 of those trees and sort of get where they look like they're connecting together, that's where the monument ought to be. Any questions about monument reference?
We do have a question from Adrian.
Yep.
What is the perimeter for monument references? 50 feet, 200 feet?
Generally, we try to keep them close. Most of them are 20, 25 feet away. What's the longest, I'll ask Jim and Fred, what's the longest distance you've run into? Is about 100?
Probably 75 feet, I would say.
So, and the monument reference diagram lets you know that distance. So, any other questions? Not, we'll move on. Okay, the other part the surveyors get to do is blazing the boundary line. So as the boundary moves from one monument to the next, if it's in a wooded area, that's especially when this comes into play, we're going to try to mark trees that are either on or near the boundary. And we have 3 categories. Page 26 in the manual gives you a good idea of what some of these look like, but we're going to reproduce some of that here. The boundary goes through a tree. It's called a line tree. The boundary is within a foot of the tree, but not going right through it. It's a 1-foot tree. And if the boundary is 1 to 3 feet, it's a 3-foot tree. These trees are marked with blazing about 3 inches wide, 6 inches high. I tend to call them a splotch. So let's look at some examples from the stewardship handbook, the field book. This shows you, first of all, on the line. The first one up here is an example of a line tree where the line goes right through the tree. And you may not see it on your copy here. If you actually look at the actual manual or have one printed out, you can see there's little yellow paint splotches shown, or a little rectangle showing where this paint would go. So if the tree is within a foot of the line, that's a 1-foot tree, and it gets 3 marks. I didn't mention that. The line trees get marked on both sides, so it has 2 paint marks on it, exactly 2. A 1-foot tree will have 3 paint marks. 1 at the top, 1 at the side here, and 1 at the bottom. The side, if you find 3 of them, look for the middle one. That tells you which side of the tree the line is on. And the line is within a foot of that tree. Here's another example of a line tree where the line doesn't go right through the middle of the tree, but it's still marked with 2 blazes pretty much in the middle of the tree, saying that the line goes through the tree. And the other example here is a 3-foot tree where the edge of the tree is less than 3 feet from the line itself. These are all indications that are made by a surveyor. You don't add new ones. They are all part of the legal survey of that boundary. So we can refresh that paint, but we cannot put new ones, just to make it clear. And finally, down here at the bottom is a line tree, which the tree just grazes, but is on the line. And again, it will get 2 marks. So when you're in the field, when we finally do field work, sometime later, if you're doing this, you're going to be looking at trees to decide what they are and which is the case. And if you're doing boundary maintenance, you'll be repainting them. So here's an example of what it looks like. Here's an example where they're generally substantial trees if we've got them available. I've seen boundary trees painted that are maybe 3-inch diameter. It's really hard to tell if it's a line tree or not, because sometimes all the splotches blend together. Okay, and then the other thing that the surveyors put up is boundary signs. And we'll see some examples of them in just a minute, but they're placed at each monument facing out. So if you have a true right angled corner, normally there'll be two of the boundary signs facing each of the two directions that are pointing out of the quarter. They're normally placed inside the quarter, but just a little bit. Okay. Okay. By the way, you asked when's the diameter of a tree. Normally at breast height is where it's measured. But I didn't catch the other question. Was there another one there? But we can.
Sorry, I was muted. The other question is from Lawrence. Are the only blazing done in yellow?
Good question. Actually, originally in the 1980 surveys, the one from 84 for a while, they were done in red. And the red paint was a lead-based paint, and they have over time, the new standard is all yellow. So all the current boundary paint is yellow. And any spot where we find the red one, we overpaint it with yellow. The reality is that red paint lasts an awfully long time. We've still got ones that are 35 years old. The yellow paint might last 5 or 10 years, but all repainting is done in yellow. So boundary signs, switching back to this topic, on long lines, we can put them about every 300 feet on the boundary, placed just inside the boundary on the National Park Service side, but facing out so that people approaching from the land adjacent see a sign saying you're at the boundary of the Appalachian Trail. So this is something that volunteers can place new ones if it's needed or replace damaged ones. These are not exactly the same level of license survey requirements that it's okay to add ones, especially in problem areas. And some boundary, depending on other kinds of problem areas and what's appropriate, have no hunting signs and some other special signs. So speaking of which, here's some example of what it looks like. On the left is a standard boundary sign. It's pretty much 3 by 12. You'll notice that we don't nail them all the way in tightly to the tree, leave about an inch protruding. That's because these trees grow, and if you don't get out often enough or you miss one, the tree, sometimes just smashes them entirely through. And the one that shows on the right there is an example of what happens when one finally breaks free. We also, here's the no hunting signs that can be put on the Appalachian Trail. And if we have an area where there's dumping problems, we'll put the no dumping signs. And there's a few other signs as well, but that's most of the examples. Here's an example of, on the left, of posting for no hunting, and a couple of the different US boundary signs. There are 2 different generations here. The one on the middle there is a newer one showing the AT differently than the one on the right, where on the center one, you've got what's called the pregnant triangle version of the National Scenic Trail. Sometimes I mentioned that you might have a boundary that's going through an open field. Quite often they'll put a fence post in and mark it with US boundary signs. In this case, you'll notice down at the bottom, there is actually a monument right behind it there. Any questions on the signage that we haven't answered already? If not, we'll jump into the surveying issue. Right at the
We
front.
have one question from Lawrence. How often do people take them as souvenirs?
Well, what's your experience? Actually, Jim and Fred.
Well, a lot more often than we would like. Monuments that are near the trail or near roadways are particularly vulnerable to souvenir taking. I don't know. It's
Sorry, Jim, let me interrupt you. Lawrence rephrased himself. How many are replaced annually?
there are. We don't have any program in place to replace them. That is a work in progress. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy now has the authority to replace some particularly rock tablets where they know definitely where the monument goes, because they'll see the drill hole that was in the rock, so they know that's exactly where it goes. If a standard monument is taken, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where a replacement would go without having the proper surveying equipment.
Yeah, he's asking about the signs, I think.
Oh, the signs. Oh, okay.
We do have a stock of those.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, the signs we can replace those. That's no problem.
what's it, about 20 or 30 a year that you might do, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure how many are actually taken. There's more damage from growth of trees popping them off, and just the plastic being exposed to the UV over many years that makes them brittle.
That was another question I was asking. What are they made out of? They are plastic, and yes, they do degrade over time.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on that? If not, we'll go into some of the survey things. And my upfront comment on this is that we're not going to give everybody who's on the webinar tonight a course on how to use a compass from scratch. We'll do a little bit of relevant stuff, but there's a lot of good things on the internet on how to use a compass. But if you haven't bought one yet, we're going to, especially if you think you're going to be doing this, we'll convince you what kind of compass to buy momentarily. You'll see what we're talking about here. So survey maps normally provide the distance and direction from one monument to the next. And there are two bearing formats that are used on the different maps and charts. Azimuth is 0 to 360, which most of you are familiar with, is used for the witness tree marks. But the quadrant, which is the one that is what surveyors use, that's you'll measure degrees from north or south to the east or west. So let's jump ahead and just talk about the two compasses. Many of you may already have what we call an azimuth compass. It's 0 at north. It's marked all the way around to 360. The survey work generally is done with a quadrant compass, which you see on the right. If you look real closely, you'll see starting at north with 0, going to the east, it goes up to 90, and then starts dropping 80, 70, 60, all the way down to south, 0, and then it's going up from 0 to 90 to the west, and 90 back to 0. So survey work, we're going to get to that in just a minute, some examples of this, but that's the compass that's most useful in the field. A little bit about what's north on a compass. This is getting almost a little too far into the details of compass work, but we want to get this much straight. True north is the center of the Earth's rotation, which has nothing to do with magnets. It's the true pole, the North Pole, Santa Pole, if you want to call it that. Most survey maps that we have use a close variant on that called grid north. Each state has its own grid, which pretty closely approximates true north. Actually, example of New York State plane coordinate grid as its formal name. I think it's almost exactly pointing to true north at about the middle of the state and gets a little bit off because the Earth isn't a flat surface, but is extremely close to true north, and that is good enough for our purposes here. And then finally, magnetic north is where the magnetic field centers where your compasses point to. And that is, first of all, it moves over time and depending on where you are in the world or on the trail. So I say it varies over time because the Earth's magnetic core is liquid and that point moves over time. So you'll see magnetic north marked on a map. It'll have the date that it was done because that will change. And the difference between the two is what's called the declination. And in most good compasses of both kinds, azimuth or quadrant, you can set that declination for where you're working. It's in this area might be something like 12.5 degrees. And that's an adjustment you make on the backside of most compasses. Some do it differently. You do it once and you're done. And then after that, the north on the compass of not the magnet, but the compass then points to true north when you're using it appropriately. So let's talk about from one monument to another on their survey map. They'll indicate, and this is just hypothetical, from 275 New York 17 to New York 18, they might say they are 274.1 feet apart, and the bearing south 30, 12, 45 east. That 12, it's 30 degrees, 12 minutes, 45 seconds. Those are very fine gradations that we ignore when we're doing field work. They're much too fine for anybody other than a surveyor. The other thing to notice is we don't do feet and inches. It's all done in tenths or hundredths of a foot. And we do have, when we're training you, and you might want to get one yourself, measuring tapes that measure in tenths and hundredths of a foot as opposed to feet and inches. But to follow that line, or to follow, you say you're at 17 trying to go to 18, you'll take your quadrant compass and set it for 30 degrees east of south. Notice it's starting at south, you're going east, you're ignoring the minutes and seconds. Then, holding the compass flat, you'll line the needle with the north mark. That's putting red in the shed. You'll see that in an example in a minute. And then the edges of the compass point to the direction to travel. So here's an example of what we just talked about, south 30 east. This is a quadrant compass. You'll notice that we're got south there, and we're set for 30 degrees east of south. You can see that there's a center mark on the hinge, and on right below it, it tells you where to dial that bezel into. The black bezel rotates, you set that. And then, having done that, you then turn the whole compass until the north arrow, which you just see a little of at the bottom of the screen, points to north. And then the sides of that will show you where to travel. So here's an example of what it looks like for real. Same thing, it's set for the 30 degrees, south 30 east. And you'll notice the north arrow on the compass is within the red shed, which tells it that the north arrow is pointing to the north that we need. And in the parallel edges of the compass, and if you're using the mirror, there's ways to use the compass more detail, and the notch at the top is pointing straight to the direction that you want to travel in. Okay, any questions on the compass universe? Again, we're not going to try to give you a full course in compass use. Hearing none, we'll proceed ahead. Okay, those are all the things that the surveyors and the National Park Service have done to create the marking of the boundary. So what is the job of the monitor's field work? Well, you might have, and somebody asked about how much you get, and this might be as large as it gets, a mile of east boundary and a mile of west boundary. You might get, if it's big enough or difficult enough, you might get even less than that. Might be from a road crossing to maybe halfway across to the next road crossing. Might be one side only or both sides, depending on how much you're comfortable with doing. If you're a brand new monitor, you'll spend your first visit or a couple of visits just becoming familiar with the spot you're doing. In later visits, you'll start doing the serious work, documenting the status of the boundary, searching for encroachments, and doing boundary maintenance. Jim and Fred will be talking more about that in a couple of minutes. So, speaking of which, This is what goes on in the field. This is pretty much Jim's set of what he takes in the field. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Yes. So there's a whole list on the left-hand side, but looking at the picture, sort of going from the upper left, there's a hat. Right below that is I wear gaiters, protect your legs, try to keep ticks out. Other people tuck their pants into their socks, which I think is an even better practice. There's gloves. Right next to the hat is my compass. I take a trowel, which is shown next to the right. That's useful because some of these monuments are actually below ground level or covered with leaf litter, and that's a good tool to move that stuff away. And it also serves as my hammer. Moving to the right, at the top, there's a 25-foot ruler. And below that is a small wire brush next to flagging tape. And just below that are a pair of clippers. And it's hard to see, but next to the clippers, there's a pile of nails that I take if you're going to replace boundary signs. And below that, again, hard to see, I have a Leatherman multi-purpose tool. And then moving to the right again, at the top is really a carpenter's pouch that you can put on your belt. It has a couple of pockets. You can put all these small items in to carry. And next to that is a larger saw, which I usually keep in the backpack. And a supply of boundary signs you see there. And below those items are a set of maps. There's a segment map. In the middle, there's a witness map. And below that is the survey map. And the piece of paper that's right in the center, that is a copy of a spreadsheet that has a listing of all the monuments that you're going to be covering. That piece of paper is useful for recording the condition of every monument you come across, noting what damage might have occurred to that monument, the number of witness trees that still exist. You put the date, and then there's a column for comments. Below that is my 100-foot tape measure. Of course, you see my boots. You need good sturdy boots. In your backpack, you want to keep such items as, first of all, a first aid kit. You might need extra clothes because the weather might change on you. Let's see what else. Maybe extra flagging tape, bug repellent if it's a warm day. Let's see, not shown in the picture is you should have a camera, probably even better, a smartphone. So if you do need help, you can call for assistance. To the far right in the red dash circle is what I would call maintenance items. If you're going to go out and say repaint, there's a larger wire brush for removing loose bark and before you put the paint on. Of course, a paintbrush. There's special boundary paint called Bark Mark. It's a rather viscous paint, so I use a squeeze bottle and squeeze the paint onto the brush and then paint that way. Okay, we can move on.
Okay. If you're going to be doing your monitoring over a course of time, and also to help the next person if you have to retire at some point, we want to make these monuments easy to find. And this is part of what really happens in the field. And these are some examples of what we do. We sometimes flag a nearby tree with flagging tape, especially if it overhangs a monument. Flag the pipe on standard monuments if it's sticking up a few inches from the ground. For rock tablets, we sometimes pick a chunk of rock, put flagging tape around it, put it over the monument. It's also useful when the monument's in a rock wall. So we'll talk about that. We'll give you some examples in a minute. If you can't find a monument, this is where the witness trees come in useful. If you can figure out which of two trees that are on the witness map, without even dealing with the direction information, if you know the distance to it and have two different tape measures, and normally this is useful if you have two people, although we play tricks sometimes, you measure the distance from the two trees to a spot, and that generally tells you where the monument ought to be. So, and the other thing which Jim mentioned with talking about a shovel is that there are times when monuments may be below the ground. If you're in what looks like a dirt area and the surveyor is setting a monument, if he starts digging down, he needs to get down at least a couple of feet to get that thing protected. If while digging the hole he encounters bedrock, then he will put a rock tablet in the bedrock, and it will be could be a foot or more underground. So sometimes that's where part of the reality is. And again, they're often buried in leaf litter, especially if an area hasn't been well maintained as a boundary. So.
Hey, Ron, really quick before you continue,
Yep.
Lawrence did have a question for, I guess, Jim. How much does your pack weigh when you are fully packed?
I've been afraid to measure it. I don't know. I have a lot of extraneous junk in there, you know, because you're going to have your food, you're going to have your water. Like I say, first aid, you know, if you're carrying, you know, say half a dozen boundary signs, so it all adds up. It probably weighs maybe 20 pounds. I don't know.
It's not a killer, but it's not light either, right?
No.
Okay, here's a good example of, there's a monument in this picture. Some of you with eagle eyes might find it. Anybody see it? Well, let's show you what we do to make it easier to find. Same spot. You'll notice here we've got, especially the top center, you'll see some flagging tape placed over it sometimes. So this is the after. We do some strategic marking. We put flagging tape on the pipe. We put flagging above it as well. And where the boundary sign is, which doesn't, remember, not all boundary signs are at monuments. So we will, in this case, put some flagging tape there as well. Another example here. Notice the flagging tape up in the tree showing you roughly where right over approximately where that rock tablet monument is. That's a rock tablet. And then we also took a piece of rock, wrapped flagging tape around it and put it over the monument. That also helps hide some of these monuments from people who might try to take one as a souvenir. And here's a close-up example of one of those where here's a rock tablet and the piece of rock that moved off to the side here, but that can be put right over the monument. The other thing I'll mention, which we didn't mention so far, is when the surveyors set these monuments, the AT symbol points true north. At least it's supposed to. 99% of them do. Every once in a while on a Friday, they screwed up setting one. But that is another indication when you are using your monument reference maps, you can adjust using that fact. Okay, here's some other things that are some other examples on the left. There's a monument that's actually in a fence line, and you can see again one of the rocks that has been marked and placed over the monument. And over on the right is an example where the monument actually has on the post, it's a standard monument, some tape on it, and up above it in the tree, you'll see flagging tape hanging. And, and that tends to survive at least a year or two to the next time you're out, in between a few times. Any questions on the actual stage of putting it all together? So first couple times out, you'll be finding your monuments. You'll sometimes be able to go out with one of the experienced people. Question: is it always the same color, the flagging tape? We tend to use orange a lot because A, it's available, but B, also it's pretty obvious. There are other colors. We've got, and I've seen blue used, there's lime green, but the most commonly used one is orange. Any other comments on that from?
We also have Joe. Is it good practice to check that the monument points true north?
It's, I would say almost all the time it's there anyway. It's more useful to do it the other way around, to use the fact that it's north to orient your monument reference diagram, because one of the things you're going to be doing, if the monument's findable in there, is to document the condition of your witness trees. Some of these surveys were done in 1984. That's over 35 years ago. And it is not unusual, even though they marked 3 trees in 1984, that only one of those may be surviving. So part of what you're going to be doing is locating those witness trees and reporting the condition of them. So
we also have a question from Adrian. Have they tried marking them with GPS and applying them to a mapping program such as Avenza Maps?
Who wants to answer that one?
I'll answer that. Yes, we have longitude and latitude for every monument, probably out to about 6 decimal places. I personally have had mixed success trying to locate a monument using those points, because first of all, we really don't have the accuracy. As an example, Fred and I were out earlier this year walking a piece of boundary that hadn't been maintained in a number of years. And we were having a heck of a time trying to find this one monument that the assigned monitor could not find. And I know Fred was using the GPS coordinates trying to look for it. And when we finally found the monument, Fred was maybe 100 feet away from where the monument actually was. So it's, like I say, it's a mixed blessing.
Most GPS equipment you'll be using, unless you've got a really expensive one, is not accurate enough to really locate monuments or to even define them. You need, sometimes they have when they're actually determining that information, they're using additional equipment that gives you selective detail improvements so that they can get it accurately. But stuff you're using, if it's within 20 feet, you're lucky sometimes. But we're getting there. I mean, over time, things are getting better in that field.
We have another question from Joe. How high off the ground should trees be marked?
Normally, it's
I can
in a
answer
hand
that.
range.
The witness trees, I assume that's what he's talking about.
No, he's talking about the ones hanging over a monument, I think.
Oh, the flagging?
Yeah, I assume.
Well, any place probably 6 feet up.
No, he's asking about witness trees.
Oh, okay.
He just corrected us.
The early surveys, the witness points were pretty close to the ground, maybe a foot up the trunk of the tree. Later surveys that did the 3 stripes, they are typically maybe starting 2 or 3 feet off the ground, and then maybe 1 foot between each axe blaze. So go from 2 to 3 to 4 feet.
And usually they mark the middle tree is the one with the nail in most
Right.
cases. Any other questions on all that? Oh, we got a thanks on it. Okay. Well. Okay. Jim's going to take over and talk about boundary maintenance in a little more detail here.
Okay. Boundary maintenance really comes in basically two parts. The major thing that we try to do is repaint the boundary. As Ron mentioned earlier, the paint will last maybe 4 years. When you get to the 5th year, it's really starting to fade and get hard to see. And older than 5 years, it's very difficult. If the trees hadn't been axe blazed, it'd be almost impossible to follow some of these boundary lines. So we went over the slide earlier, and you can see the items I use on the right-hand side, the paint and the wire brush, and of course your paintbrush. This paint, I will point out that you get it on your clothes, it's not coming out. So, and I should also mention that this paint is special paint that's provided by the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and we make it available to the volunteers. It's not something that you can go to your Home Depot or Lowe's to buy. Okay. So here's a good picture. It is taken from your handbook. You'll notice the photo on the left that hasn't been maintained in who knows how many years. It's hard to see in this small photo, but that front tree, you can see the axe blaze if you, yeah, right down a little bit, right there. If you zoom in on that, you can see the axe blaze. So, you know, compare that line of trees to the post painting, and it's much easier to follow that boundary than the other one. You know, painting boundary also has a secondary effect in that it lets our neighbors or other people who might be entering into the Park Service property, lets them know that the Park Service property is being cared for, is being monitored, and I think it leads to people having greater respect for the Park Service property. So, okay, here's again a before and after picture of a witness tree. On the left, it's barely, you're barely able to see the axe blazes. So there's 3 of them here. There's a newer one. And then on the right, it's been repainted, and even a new nail was set in the center blaze with a washer underneath the head of the nail. So, okay. Let me go, can you go back to slide 60, Ron? Is that
Hold
easy
on
for
just
you
a
to?
minute. Yeah, I learned I can't use page up. It goes to the beginning of the show. So hold on.
Okay.
Hold on just a minute. See if I can get it the quick way. Let's see. There you go.
There you go. Something that we've been doing more often in recent years for these rock tablets, we put yellow paint around the monument, and you can see it here, that yellow circle. It's just another means to make that monument more visible to, you know, to the next time you come through. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, we talked a little bit about this before, these 3 by 12 boundary signs. They're typically held in place with roofing nails that that are long enough to allow about 1 inch of the nail to stick out from the tree. So that allows room for the tree to grow out without popping the sign right off. Let's see. So how signs get damaged, earlier we said they do get brittle over time. You will see signs of animals that have been chewing on them. Possums, or I'm not sure who does that, but and as pointed out earlier, when these are replaced, they should be on the Park Service side of the property, as close to the line as possible, so people know exactly where that boundary is and they're crossing over into government property. Okay.
Any questions on this section?
Let me, I just mentioned painting. There are other issues with maintenance of the boundary that arise from time to time. And we have some boundary that goes through dense thickets of barberry and stickers, tremendous overgrowth, particularly by invasives. This is a particularly hard thing to do. It takes time, and we do have the access to the ATC monitor crew. We schedule them maybe a year in advance. They'll come up and help us out. They've been helping us out last year, actually, to cut our way through some of this overgrown area. So we do have that resource available to us. Okay.
Okay, Fred's going to talk now about mitigation of our encroachments.
Okay, so as Jim mentioned, probably one of the best practices is to try and prevent encroachments, and to do that is to have a well-maintained, visible boundary. And the other thing you can do to help kind of prevent encroachments is to get to know some of the neighbors when appropriate. So some of the boundary actually is right next to people's backyards. And in those situations, if you see somebody, a homeowner out in the back, you can approach them and, introduce yourselves and tell them a little bit about the AT. And most of them know, because this has been going on for, like 30 years. People have been walking and monitoring. So if we do find an encroachment, there is first of all, they're classified into either minor, moderate, or severe. And there are a couple of things you need to determine. First of all, you want to establish where the encroachment is located. Is it actually on AT corridor? And there's a flow chart, which we'll look at in a little bit, that tells you kind of how to deal with encroachments and how severe they are. So let's see, go to the next slide. So these are some examples of encroachments. Is vehicle use on the corridor, like ATV or bicycles, dumping, which could be yard waste. It could be also large hazardous materials. Sometimes people have been known to extend their property. and use AT land for personal use. We find hunting stands, which also known as tree stands. People have been known to remove trees. We've found people living on the AT. People have parked on the AT lands, and there are also fire rings. So how do we deal with encroachment? So where appropriate, you can talk to the landowner. Like I say, the best practice is to talk to them before they and educate them before they do something they shouldn't be doing. But for example, you might find an ATV track. So you can walk the track, and if it goes to somebody's house, you can kind of approach them, knock on the door, ask them if they know anything about the trail, and you just let them know that they're not allowed to drive a vehicle on AT lands. Another example would be a landowner has expanded their lawn, so that, very similar. Actually, we'll look at an example of that in a little bit. So you can talk to them and explain that they're expanding their lawn onto AT land, and that they're not allowed to do that. So if you do find an encroachment, or it's sometimes known as, it's also referred to as incursions. So we need to report that, and this would be different from the standard report. This would be an additional report. So for whatever you find, and there's on the ATC website, there's a section called Boundary Resources. This is the link to that section of their website. If you go to their ATC website, and you just search for Boundary Resources, you'll find this. And in that folder, you'll find there's an example of a report that tells you how to fill it out. And then there's a blank report, and there's also a copy of the flow chart, which we're going to look at next. And there's all sorts of other things in that folder that is of interest to corridor monitors. So this is the flow chart, and it goes down, and you determine whether you have a minor, moderate, or severe encroachment, and it kind of tells you where the reports go and who's going to deal with it. And at the lower right, which is kind of hard to read, but it has some examples of encroachments, some of which we already mentioned. There's like a minor encroachment would be yardways, parked vehicles, extending property line. Moderate is an ATV, horses, mountain bikes, tree stands, and repeat offenders. We have had some repeat offenders. And severe would be timber theft, large scale hazardous material dumping, structures, and also repeat offenders.
Fred, we do have a question.
Sure.
What are the most common encroachments in our area?
Most commonly, we do find tree stands fairly regularly. I mean, I don't know how, maybe you might find one a year or something like that. We have found some structures. And a lot of yard waste is fairly common.
I'll also mention in Orange Rockland, there are a lot of ATV issues
Yeah.
on the west of the Hudson part of New York.
They're also particularly difficult to deal with because go to the next slide. So this is an example of dumping that you might find. And in this particular instance, we talked to the landowner. We I don't know if you can see, we posted the US boundary sign. You put an X, so that we actually put, I think 3 or 4 of those boundary signs there just to let them know. And we've also put on the tree there that says a no dumping sign. And so we go to the next slide.
Fred, are monitors responsible for confronting offenders?
Yes and no. If you feel uncomfortable, I wouldn't expect anybody to do something if they feel threatened in any way, shape, or form. I would say back off.
The other part of that answer is that basically, if anything gets down to a serious offense like that, that's when we call in the National Park Service, the Appalachian Trail Chief Ranger, or one of his designees get involved. It becomes an issue which is outside the purview of volunteers. And this can go all the way up to them issuing a ticket for a violation. Okay.
Right. So, yeah, if you feel uncomfortable, you shouldn't. But my experience has been most people are pretty, they'll listen to you. You shouldn't threaten people. You kind of phrase everything as a question. We ask people if they know about the AT lands and point out that they shouldn't be doing whatever it is they're doing. Usually you don't actually find people doing anything. So this is an example of that. This is an illegal structure that was out in the middle of, it wasn't near anybody's house. There was no way to tell who had done this, who had left this. In addition to building this, what I think was a hunting blind, they also cut all those poles. So they, and we counted something like 50 of these were cut. In this particular instance, we put a sign up notifying them that they were doing something they shouldn't be doing. And we posted a no hunting sign and one of the other signs. And then ultimately the boundary crew came up and helped us resolve this, which was by we took it apart, dispersed all the poles, and ended up carrying about 100 pounds of garbage and junk out. So,
so I guess this answers Tim's question. Do you remove any structures or cells if no one can identify who they are from?
So I guess the answer is yes, we do. In this instance, we didn't have any, we never identified who built that. So that's what we did.
Anything left on these corridors is generally considered litter, and we can remove it. There are some counterexamples if it has significant value. You'll see one in a minute.
Yeah, we can actually go to the next slide. All right, so on this, we're actually going to have a question. So everybody get ready to type your answer into the, what's it called, the chat box. So this is an example of a hunting stand. I don't know if you can see it. It's a little hard to see, but the hunting stand is there on the right. That's the seat where the hunter would sit. And the yellow line is approximately where the boundary line is. And on this particular slide, the private property is on the right of that sign over there. So the tree stand is legal. It's on private property, and the boundary is on the left. So what could possibly be wrong with this situation? I see some answers. I see some
potential of shooting into federal land.
Yeah, I think everybody has the idea. Potential shooting into land. It's facing the AT land. The hunter is positioned to hunt on the land. Yes, exactly. It's wasn't that hard a question, I guess. But obviously, it was they're shooting into into the corridor. So we posted over on, oh, can you go back on?
Okay, sorry.
We resolved, in this instance, we resolved that we did post on the left a no hunting sign, which is kind of looking right at them when they're sitting up in the tree stand. And the other thing, of course, we put a sign on the tree stand. And in this instance, the procedure is you're supposed to put a sign on them notifying, which we'll see in the next slide. And you wait at least 30 days and then come back, and if they haven't removed it, then we can take it down. In that other instance, the tree stand disappeared, so that was a good resolution. In this one, this is an example of a tree stand that was on corridor property. So they posted a sign like this on the right, and you wait 30 days and then come back, and if the tree stand is still there, we can take it down and dispose of it. And
Fred, Christina had a question. Do they ever
Sure.
come back and rebuild?
I can't remember them ever coming back in the same place. They come back in different places. These are actually metal. They're kind of strapped to a tree, and so they're meant to be put up and down pretty easily. But they can be a little tricky taking them down. But does that answer your question? So this is an example of a adjacent landowner kind of extending their lawn. And on the left, you can kind of see that flagging tape was marking right where the monument was. And we knew that the boundary goes straight back between that, where the cursor is going. And from there, it went back to the probably about 300 feet to the back of this person's property. And then it went probably another 300 feet into the woods before we found a boundary tree. And we were pretty sure where that's where the boundary line is. And you can see on the right, this person had done all this great landscaping, but it's all on corridor property. And this was ultimately resolved. At the time, several years ago, the AT office actually had a surveyor on staff. He came in up and looked at this, and he was convinced. I mean, he didn't have a problem. And I think he must have talked to the ranger. And then when the ranger was in the area, the ranger talked to the homeowner and resolved this problem. So let all that go back to be natural. And you can go to okay, so we're up to the Q&A. Does anybody have any questions?
Give everybody a little.
Let me point out that Ryan Seltzer from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy has been very helpful in working through some of these encroachments, giving us guidance, and often penning a letter to the adjacent landowner on ATC letterhead, which is effective. And if we need to go further than that, he'll help us interface with the National Park Service enforcement ranger if that's necessary. And the Park Service can also call upon other neighboring Park Service facilities for help if it's needed. We've had on several occasions rangers from the Roosevelt Vanderbilt National Historic Park come out and assist in resolving some of these issues. So there is help out there. It's not just for the monitor, him or herself to address. You know, we're all in this together and we work cooperatively. So, okay.
We do have a question from Monica. Are homeowners notified that their land is near a corridor when they purchase the land?
Let me comment on that. What often happens, the most likely case, is the realtor selling the property will use this as a feature. And for most people, this is something which they consider a major positive that their land borders national park land. So more often than not, that's how they find out that they are a direct neighbor to the Appalachian Trail. The other answer historically that we have done, we did some of this actually a couple of decades ago in Dutchess Putnam part of the eastern part of New York, was to actually develop a program to identify the trail neighbors. Sometimes we sent them a letter inviting them to come to a meeting saying you are either an immediate neighbor or sometimes just an approximate, you live in a subdivision which borders the trail, not necessarily, they might not be exact neighbors. Invite them to a meeting either in their town or nearby, where what we have done is actually, we call it a neighbor relations program, where we do a presentation to them about the Appalachian Trail. And in many cases, we've picked up neighbors who are become our eyes and ears in the field. And, in one case I can think of in East Fishkill, we got a call from one of the neighbors saying, I think somebody near me is building a driveway across the Appalachian Trail lands. And they were absolutely right. So we sort of deputize them as extra eyes and ears, not quite full corridor monitors, but they can help us keep an eye on the trail in their neighborhood. Does that answer your question? Let's see. Yep. Okay. So we'll talk briefly about reporting. Jim?
Okay. There's two types of reports that we ask monitors to do, and these are both done semi-annually. One report will go to the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, and the other is will eventually go to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. They have two different purposes. The Trail Conference report was due the end of June and also the end of November. In it, we asked that people report the dates that they were out working, the hours they put in, the travel time, and maybe time spent doing paperwork. And we also asked that any people out with them, what their names were and what time that they put in. And lastly, we asked for like a summary of incidents or problems that they've incurred during their various work trips. The ATC report is a much more detailed thing, and basically it comes in the form of a spreadsheet. In that spreadsheet, there's a line item for every monument, and you can record information about the condition of the monument, if it's damaged, what kind of damage it is, the date that you were there, how many witness trees are still in existence. And there's a spot there for comments. Another part of this report, you can list any maintenance work that was done, whether you just walked the boundary or you actually did painting or other maintenance kind of activity.
We do have a question from Adrian. Is
Yes.
there a number or email address posted somewhere if someone just walking the trail can report problems?
Yes. I guess most of the time that they would call the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, and then that would get fed to the supervisor, and the supervisor would be in touch with the person that's responsible for that particular area of boundary, if it's a boundary problem or encroachment. So that's the best way.
Jim, too, if you don't mind me chiming in,
Yeah.
if you go to our website and you go to the contact us page, there is a section there where you can report a problem on the trail that you encounter.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a good common number to call. There is also a National Park Service crime reporting number. If you see something that's really serious, that number should also be called. Okay, I don't have the number right here with me, but it's a 866 toll-free number. And that, I'm not sure whether that's on the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference website, that number also.
There it is. Brian just put it up.
Okay.
Six
it's
seven
on.
seven. Yeah, you got it there.
So let's see. So I'd just like to say all these reports, they should be fed up through the supervisor, and then supervisor will then forward them to the particular agency. I know the Trail Conference has online reporting. You can fill out, it's a fillable PDF form. You can do that right online. The other one, like I said, it's a spreadsheet, which would come back to the supervisor, who will then roll these all up and forward them to ATC.
Okay, it's about time to wrap some of this up. So let's talk about where to go from here. If you'd like to continue following about this, if you'd like to get the field training, if you think you want to do something like this, in any case, email volunteer@NewYork-New-Jersey-Trail-Conference.org, and the volunteer staff will pass the information on to the different trail committees based on where you're located and what's nearby, as we talked about before. If you'd like additional online training, you can put that on there as well. And we're also going to send a follow-up to this for everybody who signed in, if you did at the beginning, or if you did now. We asked people at the beginning to, if in the chat window, to indicate that you were here if you're not well identified by your by signing the way you came in. For example, it only has your phone number. So, but if you'd like additional online training, let us know. I am aware that in a couple of months, the Trail Conference is working on putting out a basically a map and compass online course. It should be out in a few weeks that you can sign up for, or at least follow afterwards. So we can do that as well. That's part of what you should know. Are there any, if the other thing to think about, if you do become a monitor, again, we said don't go alone, especially if you're new. We often pair you up with a more experienced monitor. Again, be safe, off-trail work, because the trail goes through pretty clean spots. The boundaries may go through over cliffs, through all sorts of rough conditions. So footing can be treacherous. Lyme disease can be a major problem. And, when we actually get out in the field, we talk about how to protect against that. Generally, the best thing to do is to use, as the professional boundary crew does, is they tend to use permethrins, which don't just repel ticks, they kill them. You can get permethrin embedded clothing. You can either send yours off to be embedded or do it yourself, or buy permethrin embedded clothes. There are companies that sell it. So that they are good for, especially in the last case, they're something like 60 or more washings. And finally, if you're out in the field, this is true for any volunteer work, practice good check-out and check-in procedures where you make sure somebody knows that you, or even if there's two of you going out, that somebody else knows roughly where you'll be and what time you'll be back, so that if you are 2 hours late, they can contact the authorities and start a search, because things can go wrong on the boundary. It's not exactly, you're not likely to find other hikers walking on the boundary. If you're close to somebody's backyard, you might be lucky, but if you're in the middle of nowhere, it could be different as well. Any final questions to people have? For your last chance here.
Hey, Ron, this is Jim.
Yep.
Hopefully we can get out of this, virus situation. And if we can do that before it gets too late into the full foliage season, I would like to ask everybody if they could join us for in the field training to actually see firsthand what we've been talking about. So anyway, hope we can make that happen within, before June.
Yeah, we don't tend to do this field work in midsummer just because there's a lot of summer growth that make it very hard to do. Okay, again, thanks to everybody for joining us this evening. As you know, volunteers make a big difference. They can move mountains. It's fun. We all have a good time doing it. Again, the contact information, volunteer@nynjtc.org is the best way to give us your interest. You will also expect follow-up on this. One of the things we'll get is a link that lets you, if you haven't already downloaded the Corridor Stewardship field book, you should do that, especially if you think you'd like to proceed with this. And we also, if somebody would like it, we can also give you the link for the PDF of the file that we actually used for the session tonight. Any last minute questions? Again, if not, thank you all for A, signing up, and B, showing up at this webinar. We appreciate your interest and hope you found it valuable. And I guess we're about 2 minutes from 9 o'clock, so we did that okay.
Good night.
Good night to all.
Yeah. Bye, Fred. Bye, Martha.
And thanks to Melissa for taking care of the hosting duties here.
Oh,
Are
of course.
we past your bedtime, Melissa?
You'd be surprised. Usually I'm in bed by like 8:30.
Appropriate
Okay,
question.
bye all. Good job. Thank
Have a
you.
good
Take
night.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was great.
Yeah, I think so.
You still recording?
Oh,